to age, and then
that is so epic, bro. I can't believe you just thought about that on the spot. What? To age sojourner. Okay. All right. So, how we doing? Are we all right?
We're good. Glad to be back.
Yes.
Are we still doing that thing where we're supposed to be like telling people who we are? And
yes. No. I don't know. Maybe. It's a good idea every once in a while. I mean, I am being. I mean, you should see my.
You are Mike, and you are Andre.
You should see my work on the show notes these days. It's profound. It's like, I mean, it's consistent. It's regular. It tells people what we're talking about. It's like,
cool.
I mean, my goodness, just look at the show notes, people. But I don't know what's relevant to talk about. That I
don't even know if you're being sarcastic. I haven't even seen the show notes.
No. I'm being real. It's
for major YouTube users.
Major improvements. Yeah, because I get shouted at if like people are like, well, what are you talking about? You know, who are you? What are you talking about? I'm like, oh, sorry.
It's hard enough to follow this podcast as it is.
give us a fighting chance. Yeah. So anyway, I've been doing a little bit better there, but the only thing relevant, I think, is that we're a bunch of pastors. We live in New Zealand, Nick and I, and Andrea lives in the UK, and the convoluting point here is that Andrea and myself are brothers. So if you're getting any
and we're brothers from another mother,
and none of us are from the places that we're currently at. We're all from South Africa, which is yet another point that could cause major confusion. So I think it's almost better just to
ignore it.
Just to roll with it. Just roll with it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just let the confusion overtake you and overwhelm you, and then just see where you end up at the end. It's kind of the fun part about the podcast. If we don't get you with our accents, or we'll get you with the content. We'll get you somehow. We'll confuse you one way or another. But hey, thinking about people that have stuck with us and that we're thankful for, and they give us a little bit of encouragement along the way. And just, why are we doing this? Well, it's kind of this sort of thing that helps us out. I want to give a quick shout out to Andrew Mayer. I think that's how you pronounce your surname, brother. Andrew Mayer from Omaha. And he's with Pat Abendroth and the guys there. And it seems like there's a Kleinian Baptist revival of sorts happening. I mean,
going on there.
I told him if I'm going to the States, I'm heading over to Omaha. That's not only has Counting Crows written a song about them. Omaha. Exactly. It seems like something is going on. So no, thankful. He just mentioned he appreciated the podcast. He's actually said he listened to all of them, which is incredible, because we're racking the numbers up now. But that is heroic. Even I hope that you're okay after all of that, and that you're not too badly messed up.
Don't give me fun.
Yeah, but what he appreciated, and what I appreciate about him letting us know that he appreciated it, was just that exactly what we're trying to do, bring in this Kleinian Reformed Baptist angle. I mean, I suppose emphasis on the Kleinian, rather than the Baptist. I suppose, it's just the way I feel like I've wanted to roll. I mean, I am Baptist, so it's going to come in, and I feel like it flows naturally out of Klein's theology in many different ways. Not saying Klein was a Baptist, but still. But we're majoring on the Kleinian side, majoring on the big issues rather than wanting to get stuck on baptism particularly. Obviously, baptism is a juicy topic because it's sort of that nexus point with all of the biblical theology where it comes to bear on some of these issues. So we have feasted out on that in the past. We will do that in the future. We reserve our right to do that kind of thing every now and again. But as in terms of the mainstay, as the subtitle for the podcast channel thing says somewhere, we're really just wanting to think about those big rubric hermeneutical issues as they pertain to systematic theology, biblical theology, and just life in the two ages, I think. So thank you for your encouragement, Andrew, and the others that are sticking with us. And just appreciate what we're doing. We appreciate it that you appreciate it, and then it just kind of helps us, because every now and again you do think like, what if, is there even a point to all of this?
It would be cool to know, like, if there are other people watching it, to hear from you guys, because I genuinely have no idea how many people listen to this or watch it, or if anybody listens to it. Because for me, this is just like my hour in the week where I hang out with Nick and Mike, and
yeah. So we're getting some numbers on YouTube, which we had like 1 or 2 listeners,
used to get
viewers.
like 3 or 4 views.
Yeah. So now it's like sort of around the hundreds,
triple digits.
Yeah, so that's good. So but still the action's happening on, which we will be moving soon, but on Podbean. So people prefer audio. There's something about our faces that is obviously not as mesmerizing as we hoped it would be, but
it is too much. It is too much beautiful beardedness to take in. I know.
It's a lot. It is a lot. But someone did say to me that we need to get onto things like Spotify.
Yeah, I know. Well, that would be like getting your show notes in order, and I put that in that category. Just being awesome, which
we'll get there.
We'll get there. Just give us time. My goodness, like all the pressure, enough to make a brother crack. I mean, at the end of the day, we do just want to hang out and do just want to talk about the next little bit of covenant theology, right? That's what we want to do. So, and by the way, after this, Dave, I got it with me? No, I don't. I thought I did. Anyway, I'll leave it for later. But after this series of essays on covenant theology, I got a next book. Got another one.
Oh.
I'll let you know about it later.
All right.
Okay. Let's think about. Where is my iPad? Yeah.
The Davidic Covenant.
Davidic Covenant. You guys know about Richard Belcher?
This is Richard P. Belcher Jr.
Yes. Oh, we spoke about it before, didn't we? He's
right.
Senior
guys, the Journey to Grace, Journey to Holiness, Journey to Cessationism, Journey to Everything Reformed Baptist.
Have we figured out if they are related? Are we sure about that?
Are.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
That is amazing. So, and then he wrote this book, Explanation on Covenant Theology, or of Covenant Theology, Promises of God, something to that effect. And so, yeah, he's a good guy to make the comments that he's making. So, I like this. I'll say up front, I like this essay a lot better than the last 2. It was good. It wasn't too edgy. It didn't make any extreme points one way or another.
No.
It probably
just
didn't.
Very informative. Just putting the Davidic Covenant in its proper place. I mean, I just really appreciated, as you move through the covenants, you start with Genesis 3:15, and it's very vague. It's very broad. There's a man who's going to be born of Adam and Eve, and he's going to be our savior. And then you get the Noahic covenant, and that secures the stage upon which the work of redemption will be done. And then you get a man and his family, Abraham. And then, there's Isaac and Jacob, and then Jacob has 12 sons. And then there's Judah, who gets highlighted as the one who will have the scepter in his house.
Yeah.
And then now you get the Davidic covenant, which brings specificity to those general promises. And so that's the beauty of moving here to the kings.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, those things were always there in kind of in a more subtle form. And I think that's
seed form.
I was camping on holiday, and if some friends were staying with us, they probably listened to this. But we got into the debate about whether or not it was right for Israel to have a king, because they read sort of Judges as being sort of almost like a better system, and it all went
pear-shaped. There was no king in Israel.
Well, in this,
that's a negative statement.
And anyway, and so we had that kind of discussion. But I think this essay and thinking about the Davidic Covenant, seeing its beginnings all the way going all the way back, does help to inform that discussion as well.
It's huge. Yeah, I mean, I think. Wow, that king's thing is so powerful, because the whole point of the book of or Judges, at least, the end of the Judges, that last verse, I think it is, where the central problem is defined by way of not having a king, which is amazing. Of all the things going on there, that's what then preludes the rest of it. But I think it's such an important flow, because you have this this focal point that's starting to develop in the king of Israel according to the works principle. That, what was true of the people under a works-oriented covenant like that of Sinai now becomes true of the king who represents the people. So he is he's doing the same thing that the people are doing, except it's all focused now on the king. So you can see what a massive step that is toward, getting us ready to understand Christ and, making the eternal covenant legible in that regard, the last Adam. Well, I suppose, what I was going to just say as a kind of lead up, maybe it fits in well with that sort of thing, is that, bringing Klein to bear on these sorts of things, I don't think this was overly anti-Kleinian or anything like that, but it's just like when you do read through Klein, I mean, you're left with some very pointed questions if you're not in agreement with him. If you are in agreement with him, then you're really sort of, I suppose you're very, very satisfied that those pointed questions have been answered according to that basic system. I felt that Belcher kind of left a lot of that a little bit more generic. So if you came to this whole thing asking questions like, is the Davidic covenant a covenant of grace or a covenant of works, or what is it exactly, or how does that fit in exactly, and how does that fit in relation to the eternal covenant and all that sort of thing, you'd be left in a similar place that you started. You just sort of have as you say, a flow of the story, but not so much a theological answer and a pinpointed sort of way to process all of that. So that's not so much a critique of Belcher as it is just a highlight of the value of Klein's system and the way that he brings those sorts of issues.
So this would stand as a great introduction to the importance of the Davidic Covenant as it stands in relation to, basically the movement of redemptive history as it's moving towards the exile, as it's moving towards Christ. But it's not answering the deeper questions that you have beyond the introduction level. Yeah,
that's a good way to put it. On the opening, I was kind of skeptical about this opening line. I don't know if you felt the same way, but God's covenant with David represents the culmination of all of the promises of the previous covenants. I would reserve that statement for the new covenant.
Well, isn't he's saying thus far, though, isn't he?
Yeah. Okay, but culmination is strong. It's kind of like
culmination is strong.
It could sound like climax.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's the culmination of the previous covenants. It's not the
well, and then the next sentence is perfect, where he goes, it consolidates those promises. Consolidates, perfect. A consolidation of everything thus far. Culmination, I'd wait for the new covenant before I use that language.
Yeah, but it's a strong word.
But, it's absolutely right that, and this is what we've been hinting at, that it consolidates everything thus far. So that's why it just becomes such a high point, as he puts it, in Old Testament theology and history, because it's this moment that kind of provides this laser beam forward from that point. Everything sort of comes through this prism. Yeah. Which maybe actually...
And it does. It focuses your attention on the king and what's going to happen with the line of kings.
Absolutely.
There were a couple of other details, but actually I'll reserve because they were more towards the end. I think he just made points about the line of kings like being broken. I think actually if you read through Chronicles and Kings, it sort of goes out of its way to let you know that the line of kings hasn't been broken. So it seems to me like it's very much directing to say, even though it's just a slender hope, the hope is still there. You still have, the king isn't dead, and so there's still this hope of the line of kings from David, who are connected to the future restoration. So he did make that point. He did make the point that actually now the hope of future restoration, the hope of the Messiah, is connected to the line of kings coming from David. It's connected to the Davidic covenant. But at some point he spoke about the line of kings. I can't remember the exact.
Well, there's all of this stuff around the exile, which is so awesome in Zechariah. And again, not to keep touting Klein here, but basically, I mean, his work in Glory in Our Midst and Zechariah, and I mean, it's really. It's amazing that you've got these, obviously that's a time where, the king was removed from the throne, in that they didn't have a king, and here they are hoping to restore everything after their great punishment. and they get the temple together, they got a priest, they got everything, they just don't have a king, and then they got Zerubbabel, who is in the lineage of David, and he gets restored, and all these prophetic connections to that, which are amazing. And it sort of it shows the people that there will come a king in the Davidic line, even though it's sort of, as he puts it, I thought he captured this well. There's this double-edged sort of frustration that's going on, because they're assured of these promises, but in their absolute omission at that point, because they just don't have anything like a king, like David, certainly. Anyone who's going to bring any level of glory that they experienced before, as with Solomon or anything like that, they're just roughing it out, and it's not looking good at all. And so they really start entering into that New Testament type pilgrimage, hope, waiting for that which is to come. So, I mean, whatever you might say about brokenness, I mean, I think it's like the king. I mean, you definitely don't have a king the whole way through, but the hope remains, and the lineage.
No, you don't have a king the whole way through, but you do have a line. You have a lineage, the succession.
Yeah, exactly right.
It reminds me a lot of Lord of the Rings and the Dunedain. Aragorn, man. The line of kings is not broken. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Cool. It's ironic that both of the Middle Earth inhabitants here didn't really get that.
Yeah.
I forget.
A little bit over Lord of the Rings.
So it's like the tourist trap for us, bro.
It's my only desire to come to New Zealand, apart from seeing you guys, of course, is to
go to Hobbiton.
Is to go to Hobbitland.
Little Hobbitland. Yeah, well, we can hook you up, bro. I mean, it's we got Hobbitland. It's pretty much all we got.
Got sheep as well. You got some sheep.
Yeah, got some sheep. Yeah,
part of it. Part of the whole scenario, really.
And we've also got sheep.
Yeah.
Did we mention we have sheep?
Yeah.
I think so. I think you guys have good sheep.
All right. Now, here's the thing. As you go through thinking about the covenants, and with David particularly, there is this really important concept that I definitely want to bring out, that I felt like he did towards the end, and that's this issue of Davidic sonship, the sonship of the king, these ways in which, and maybe even just to backtrack on that, just to make sure everyone's tracking with us. So what you have, when you think about, I remember listening to a lecture by Lee Ines a while ago, and he makes this point really well. Can't remember where it was. I think it must have been his upper register, must have been somewhere in one of those lectures. I think it might have been when he was doing an intro on Klein's theology. So take that under advisement. But one of the things he does really well is he shows that when we think of kind of a king and him representing the people and that sort of thing, we're thinking in terms of Western monarchy, and really not in terms of ancient Near Eastern federal representative, suzerain treaty, which is really, it's a bit of a handicap for us, because you can't think. I mean, it is a struggle. When you mentioned that, I was thinking, it's very hard for us to even conceive of a dynastic line and a monarchy without importing all those European concepts that really have no place here. And so the big issue is that there is some representation happening as you have the king who is the theocratic king, the king who is the one who is the son. It's like, as he says later, what is reserved for the people, the Son of God, spoken of as the people of Israel, now becomes placed, this title becomes placed on, is placed on the king. And he's the one who stands with God. He's the one who rules, and represents God. He's the one that engages in all that covenantal transaction for the people. And so there's just really, I mean, to miss that is really to miss so much, because that is almost everything by way of legibility for why it matters that Jesus is the king, and why it matters that he is this federal representative as the last Adam and king. It's like
hence
the whole
saying, as goes the king, so goes the kingdom.
Yes, exactly. And so it's just not true in the same way for us in a Western conception of that. So anyway, I think everyone's kind of aware of that concept biblically. We know what it means to have a federal representative, but we don't, I think, associate it enough to the idea of a kingship and what's happening over here. And that, I think if you get that right up front, it solves all sorts of problems theologically as to what exactly David's relationship was to the people, and how this works by way of the outworking of the covenant of works typology, and how it relates to the covenant of grace, and even again to the covenant of redemption. Because if you think about the covenant of redemption, the eternal covenant, there you have a covenant that Christ would, stand. He would be like a second Adam. He would work and represent as the first king failed to do, which wasn't David, it was Adam. And you've even got this whole like Saul is the failed king, and then followed by David, the successful king. So you've got all these like two Adam things going on, even within that Saul David sequence. But the whole idea here is that you've got this king who failed in Adam, and a king that was needed right up front, which is being satisfied in the eternal covenant, and everything that's being pointed to at the Davidic covenant is just like, I mean, wow, it's like basically looking directly at everything Christ is going to do and succeed in doing as the last Adam, especially as you then let that flow into Solomon. Here you have David and the Davidic son Solomon, who now have entered into rest. They've defeated the foes of God. They've built the temple. It's like seeing the real, the realities play out, at least in typological form. But there it is, and so just to make that connection up front is really, really important. Otherwise, nothing else makes sense, in my opinion.
Maybe just backtracking a little bit more, just to the Davidic covenant itself, which comes from 2 Samuel 7. What I appreciate about just the Davidic covenant is, at the point at which the covenant is made in 2 Samuel 7, it's not mentioned as a covenant at all. So, for those biblicists who are always looking for the proof text, they're always looking for the word covenant. So if they go to Genesis 1-3, they're looking for the word covenant, and the word covenant's not there. So therefore it can't be a covenant of grace. And so the Davidic covenant really is the place to help us to see that you have a very clear covenant in place, but it's only in 2 Samuel 23:5, Psalm 89:3, 28:34, Psalm 132:12, that the Bible does speak of it as a covenant, but not in that immediate context.
Totally. And that, I think we did bring that up. Yeah, it's a real tangible point, isn't it? I like the way it's so rootsy. Like you can then say, all right, well, okay, fine, there's no covenant in in
it's
Genesis.
kind of like similar to that point that you make when you're talking to JWs about John 1, and in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then there's like, oh, but there's no definite article, so it should be a God. And then you're like, well, actually, listen, if you look at the way the New Testament uses it, there's loads of examples where it does that kind of thing, so you're reading too much into it. But it's just nice to make the point when you're not defending the Adamic covenant. It's nice to make the point from another covenant where it is so clearly illustrated. And so you can kind of just put that in the back for later.
Totally, for sure.
Maybe it's slightly off the point, but 2 kingdoms eschatology and the Davidic covenant I found very helpful. So you have Solomon. So you have I think he raises the whole discussion of David was a man of war. Solomon was a man of peace. David as a man of war couldn't build the temple, but Solomon as a man of peace could. And it was intended that through Solomon as the man of peace, that the kingdom of Israel would then become the light to the nations. So the king would be brought into place, Israel will be at rest with the nations around it, and then the nations would be drawn to Jerusalem. And if you just allow that to feed into your 2 kingdoms eschatology, it's Christ who brings about rest first. And then the peace, and then the full manifestation of the kingdom. Whereas our transformationalist friends, and even our theonomist, do we call them friends, heretics? They want to see that kingdom expressed during the time of war as opposed to during the time of peace. So I just appreciated some of that.
I think that was also really helpful, because I think for a lot of folk, when you read that part in the kind of Davidic covenant, and you're thinking, well, David can't build the temple because he's got too much blood on his hands. But then it is confusing, because you're like, well, God told David, to do this. He was fighting on God's behalf. It was Yeah, at no point did we ever detect any hint of God being, disapproving of David's actions. He seemed to be doing the right thing, defending the people of God and protecting them from the enemies of God and so on. And so it is confusing when you're like, well, suddenly this is sort of counting against David, but that isn't really the idea. It's not so much that it's counting against him as it is that the kind of reign of the king reflects what that dynasty was going to be like, what that temple was going to be like. And so that kind of idea of peace in Solomon's reign, whereas David's reign was characterized more by, in some sense, war and protection and that sort of thing. And I thought that was really helpful because, it very seldomly gets articulated that way, I think.
Yeah. There's a kind of double barrel pattern that's so important that we're picking up on that really can apply in a few different ways. But I think it's just a massive theme throughout scripture that we're right on top of now as you go from David and Solomon. Yeah, you start right in the beginning. We mentioned Adam as the king, for example, but you start even before that. And, you've got God out of darkness, creating light and, bringing out of this disorder and chaos, order. And this for the purposes of building his temple. So there's this whole, I'm not saying there was sin. Yeah, I'm not saying there was sin before the fall or anything like that, but it's just that there's that pattern originally in place even before the fall. And then, after the fall, certainly you've got all these things going on where, there's there's this pattern. It's like the warring and then the temple. You've got the war with Egypt, the bringing the people out, and then the building of the tabernacle and ordering the people of God. And then that's what's happening here as well. And it, ultimately moves forward to even think of Luke and Acts together. Where you've got Jesus, who just comes
into the wilderness,
does the whole war and goes to the cross, and then Acts is the building of the temple. So what we're seeing here is really profoundly connected to that fabric of the pattern that has been in place and will continue to be in place, or at least is finally now in place, and that's important to pick up on. But the other thing is to just mention something, at least by way of the two kingdom thing and the dominion and transformational stuff as well, because what you have here is the kind of dominion that you need in order to be a transformationalist, right? Which I think is such an important point. Again, it plays into this eschatology. If you lessen what Adam was required to do, even prior to the fall, then it might be conceivable, like if Adam didn't have to have absolute mastery over the creation, if he could have just got a basic upper hand on it and, making things look good, but it really was still kind of disorderly. Well, maybe then you could see how a transformationalist case would work. But, the cultural mandate is absolute. And so what's so significant about when Noah rules over the ark and has the whole animal kingdom in perfect subjection in the kingdom of God, and when David rules over the land and then Solomon has the whole place in perfect peace and subjection to the kingdom. This tells us the kind of king we're looking for and the kind of dominion we need. And
someone you can say to the wind and the waves, be still.
Literally. I mean, that's it. One who has the power over, well, ultimately death, because otherwise the earth is mastering you. You're never mastering it. And so at the end of the day, it's all just if you take these texts seriously, we must have mentioned this in the past, but if we take these texts seriously, they can only lead to one place, I think. We can't think about our understanding of what we do now as what is being foreshadowed here, unless we're thinking about it in terms of its new covenant fulfillment, spiritually commencing now and ultimately in the consummation. So where is their absolute dominion now? With Christ on the throne. I mean, it's not in the government or some sort of parachurch
they
organization.
have to go like ultra charismatic, where they were literally being able to raise the dead and tame the tigers and hold the snakes and all that kind of stuff.
The place that we can say that Christ has absolute dominion already, even though there's remaining sin, is in our conversion, in our new birth,
and in the intermediate state,
and in the intermediate
souls
state,
of the martyrs are seated with Christ in the heavenly places.
And what you got right there? You got amillennialism.
The spiritual millennium runs alongside the millennium on earth, church militant of the church triumphant, both realities running side by side in the already but not yet.
So these things are deeply connected, right? You know, and it's not an accident that Klein, you know, a forerunner to so much of the kingdom paradigm now, you know, was this rabid amillennialist. You know,
his work on Revelation 20 is outstanding.
Yes. Amen. Okay. So that's kind of what I wanted to bring out just by way of some introductory thoughts. We haven't actually touched the essay itself, though.
But you know what? We need to talk about David and Goliath. What is the real meaning of the battle between David and Goliath?
It means you really have to be brave and tackle your
prayer, fasting, you know, going to church.
The 5 stones, bro. Don't you know
that you can slay your demon? You know?
Yeah,
you can slay
apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers.
Oh, sorry,
apostolic reformation.
Yeah, true. Everyone's got their Goliath, you know, and so you just have to look inwards and find your Goliath and then slay him with your 5 stones, basically. No, I mean, there is, yeah, I mean, it is, I mean, you know, it's one thing to say, hey, it's not about, you know, it's about Jesus and he represents the people and everything we've been saying. But, you know, again, when you say that in light of everything else we're saying now about the Davidic Covenant and the biblical theology attached to that, you see how that story actually is quite massive in terms of showing exactly what it is that the Davidic king would do. It's not just that we're saying, hey, we got a little extra angle. Sorry, go for it.
Yeah, and exactly, and to be fair, it's not about saying that there is no place for any kind of secondary or tertiary application of it to the way that we, you know, the way that we should trust God for for stuff in our life. But it's just to say that actually you can't, if you go straight there without putting it in the context of what that passage is actually about, then it's going to lead to all kinds of problems, because then it's a little bit like I was reading the other day about the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness, and how he, you know, overcomes, and Satan tempts him and he replies, "It is written." I was reading that with someone and they went straight to, this is how we should overcome Satan.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there we go.
And I was like, well, you know, there's some lessons to be learned in terms of our spiritual warfare, but
use the
problem
Bible,
is, if you go there before you go to the fact that Jesus has overcome.
Quote scripture to the devil.
Quote scripture to the devil.
Well, and it is the glorious thing about the Gospels is about Christ who has overcome. He's won the victory.
Amen.
Yeah.
Right?
And
so if you start to talk about spiritual warfare apart from that foundation, and you're in big trouble. Big
well,
trouble.
that's the thing. I mean, like, so where are you in the story of David is the question. And you're that chicken, that chicken, you know, I'll leave out the second hyphenated expression there, but
give me my cheese, David. No, you go do the thing.
Yeah. You're just cowering, and you're like, you've bailed out already, and you're nowhere to be found. And my goodness, you know, you're the one watching the MMA fight at that point and just, you know, wincing, but in the red corner and the blue corner, you're nowhere to be found, you know. So I think that's the idea. You've got to. What is you mentioned earlier? There's no point with. I mean, no one's got a problem with secondary or tertiary applications. I mean, we all understand that one passage could be applied in several different ways, but we're talking here about meaning. We're talking about you know, what this does in redemptive history and why it's there.
Focus of the text.
Yeah. So you want to be really clear on that and not just rip it out and do crazy things with it.
The point is that David is, as the Christological figure, in his humiliation and in his weakness, representing Christ in his incarnation, overcomes the enemy.
Yeah. Overcomes the enemy.
Crushes the serpent's head.
It goes back to the point you were making earlier, Mike, about the whole representative thing.
Yeah.
And about how that's really key, because if you don't see Christ as a representative of the people, David as a representative of the people, then that's going to lead to interpretations where David's just you're David, and that's going to be a problem. And I think it's not only for David and Goliath, it's also for the way we read the Psalms.
Yep,
totally.
Because you realize, like, a lot of the Psalms are about the king, and that doesn't make much sense to us, because we're like, why would we have so many songs about? I mean, we get tired of just having like a reference to the Queen in like at the end of a hymn or something like that, and we think, well, what on earth is that about? but to have so many books dedicated to the welfare of the king makes no sense unless you see him actually as
justification.
So goes the king, so goes
You literally got the doctrine of justification. It's our only hope. It is the gospel. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my goodness, give me more of those books. Give me more of those books about the Davidic king. I know. I remember preaching through some of the Psalms, and I was struck by that point. Like, this is all like, it's almost always a problem if you're going straight to seeing how this psalm just speaks about you and your individual walk with God. There are a lot of them, many of them are specifically focused on the theocratic king as he takes his place in Israel. And I love what Walke said. It's almost like the psalmists are just, whether they're dealing with David himself or Solomon or a king after, even in his disgrace, they're just taking these lavish robes and they're just throwing it on the shoulders of whatever king is there, and they're waiting for the broad shoulders that are broad enough to be able to fill those robes, And I think that was just such a powerful way to put it, in that they're just, there they are, just knowing exactly what needs to come because of this Davidic king. And you see, as coming back to the issue of the covenant itself, what a paradigm David is then. He is the thing that allows us to understand everything of what Christ has accomplished. I'm preaching on Hebrews chapter 1 still, but in he goes into this later on in the book of Hebrews as well, but just in the opening few verses you see that a big deal for the author is that now, after his making purification, he has sat down at the right hand of God, and it is declared over him, you are my son. Like, that doesn't make sense, right? Especially after he's just totally set him up as God himself. And why is it so important that you have this act in history that is this declaration of Christ as the Son, and quoting Psalm 2 about the Davidic king, and it's all on this point. He has fulfilled the covenant of redemption at that point. He is, he has become everything the gospel has pointed to in his receiving of that right of title, because of the work he worked and the enemy that he slayed. So this is, this is everything.
Does this have, that's exactly it. And does this have a connection? Because in the essay he spends quite a lot of time talking about whether it's a conditional or an unconditional covenant, and where the conditionality is, and that plays into this as well, doesn't it? So totally. The kind of conditionality and the king needing to fulfill a certain set of requirements in order to be the one, and so I don't know if that is a good segue into talking.
And that's where I felt it got very generic and sort of almost confusing. It wouldn't have answered anything, in my opinion. It would have
very broad brushstrokes, very general statements, nothing specific.
Exactly. So and a lot of it does go that way, and even to some degree there is a little bit of everyone's just got to be okay. I'm not exactly sure how this fits in at every single turn, but I think in general, he doesn't phrase it the way I think is so helpful to phrase it, in that you just simply say that when you look at the Davidic covenant, the key words here are insofar as, insofar as that there is a works principle represented in the Davidic king as a focus. Obviously we know what we're looking at. We're looking at the covenant of works, republished at Sinai.
Typologically represented.
Yep, brought to its focal point there. In terms of the covenant of redemption, we know we're seeing at that point a Davidic grant. We're seeing the thing that Christ does achieve. He's not like laboring to achieve it still. He has achieved it. And so, and then of course, because it is a unilateral promise, and you can't get away from that, it's just insofar as that is true, we're dealing with the reality of the covenant of grace as this plays itself out in history. So I think, all of those.
Think about saying it this way.
Yeah.
So let me throw this at you and you can pick it apart. So if you said
hated
that basically
it, every second of it,
the condition, what's that?
Hated.
I'll just count it.
Back to the drawing board. Back to the drawing board. No, I'm joking. Go for
in terms of the conditional, unconditional thing.
Hate it still hate it.
Is it fair to say that it's for the people? It's an unconditional covenant. For the king, it's a conditional covenant. For the people, it's a covenant of grace. the king.
It's conditional for both and unconditional for both.
Yeah.
Conditional for both typologically, unconditional for both on the basis of the covenant of grace.
There we go.
So
That's
there is the dual reality. It's the added subservient covenant,
That's the
which
key.
is in play every time there's any conditional elements.
Yeah.
But there's this unbreakable element as it pushes and drives forward to the fulfillment in Christ.
Yeah.
Which is the unconditional covenant of grace.
The two-layer
Where
thing.
does the conditionality for the people come in?
You answer, Mike. Go for it.
Well, I mean, look, they are still under the Mosaic covenant, right? So
Yes.
it is effectively, that blood that they have called upon their heads and so forth. So it is still, we're saying that, again, here's the word or the phrase, insofar as you're dealing with the works principle, you are dealing with the Mosaic covenant, which is for the people, and it is upon their heads. It's just that here's the whole lynch now. In Judges, it was not going well for them because they didn't have a representative as those under that works principle. But here we have one who can make it go well for them potentially, and does so for a moment or two, just as a glimpse is given there of what is coming, and yet directly afterwards we see it goes badly for the people, not just the king, but for the people. So it's actually, as the king represents the people, it's for the people as well, which is important to point out there. And then those times that you have, I think of coming back from the land from exile, back to the temple, and Ezra full on bringing out a theocratic principle there again, ways separation from the unbelievers and so forth. That would be very much a works principle again, to drive them to their knees, show them that they had absolutely failed, to do anything close to fulfilling the kind of prophecies of a renewed heart, Jeremiah and so forth.
And so even though they don't have a king, that principle is still in play.
That's still in play, yeah. So, you've got both of them running there. It's just that when there is a representative, there is a representative.
Yes, but in the sense that you've got what the Davidic covenant in particular is adding to that picture is that it's tying the fate of the people to the king. So the both in terms of restoration, but also in terms of failing to fulfill the law. So
right, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So I was thinking, I agree. Obviously, you've got the Mosaic covenant, which is still running through until Christ.
Yeah.
And so you have the covenant of works going through at that level. But I was thinking more specifically in terms of what the Davidic covenant is adding to that picture.
So I would see it as that right there is what it's adding is the Davidic grant, the whole idea of it's done now, it's a success, therefore it will happen. So in other words, what we're looking at there is a display 100% of the reality of the gospel.
Is that the house of David is never going to be broken. There will be a king on David's throne forever. That promise is not tied to any conditions.
No, not well. It is tied to the condition of the king typologically, and it is foreshadowing the reality of the condition tied to the King of Kings in actuality.
Isn't there a subtle difference though? Isn't there that the promise of a king forever is unconditional? It's not tied to any conditions anyway. So I think God doesn't say that if the kings, as long as the kings obey, there will be an unbroken house of David. That actually, even if they disobey, they'll be disciplined, but there will be a house of David. Well,
it's because of David's obedience himself.
Yes.
For the sake of
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Okay, got it. Yeah.
So, and that's the all important point here. That's the big flash in the pan, as it were. That's the kind of, wow, there it is. He has now done this whole thing.
There's a basis of David's
typological obedience.
And so it's very much like, I can't remember, I always mess this wording up, but I love the way Klein words it when it has to do with Abraham. We spoke about this a while ago, but Abraham, in that level of works where, individually he's saved by grace, as with David, obviously they're sinners looking forward to the actual reality of Christ who wins this for them. But there's something real typologically about what's being earned. The people don't get saved because of what they earned, but because of what they earned, the Savior comes. And there's something of a relationship like that continues.
And it's what makes them unique figures, because I think we start to get into real trouble if we start to say, well, you see, Abraham, he was saved by grace, but he also did work and earned some of the stuff, and that's like us, you know. And so again, if we don't
Exactly.
have that kind of representative thing,
the two-layer thing,
you're going to end up being Roman Catholic before you can say.
Yeah. Well,
you know,
and this
Pope
is
Francis
really the
Rob.
solution to that problem. You know, this is why we're all so excited about the whole Kleinian thing, because really, you know, to deal honestly with the text, you almost have to go Roman Catholic or something like that if you don't have a way to explain it, because they are doing, you know, Noah, he's blameless and therefore, you know, brings about salvation. Abraham, he does this thing and therefore is given the thing. David, blah, 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 and so forth. So what the genius behind Klein's two-layer typology is, he's going, don't ignore the works there. Whenever they're there, it's not to subtract from a grace works antithesis, but rather it's to pronounce the typological overlay and to show you how it is that grace is one, you know. And to,
I think sometimes we do feel awkward, you know. I've heard a lot of people like, oh, but, you know, the kind of Noah, and you want to point forward, but Noah earned the thing, and how does that work? And having an understanding of the kind of,
it's huge. It's absolutely massive.
Typological level thing.
Yeah.
So here's sort of the overemphasis on two edges. On the one hand, we have I'll put the Presbyterians generically in this corner. They sort of read the New Testament in this as if we were in the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
But then our Baptist friends in the other corner read the Old Testament as if they were in the New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you need to read this two-layer situation
Mm-hmm.
with the typological principle of works working in the context of a covenant of grace as the way of working it out.
And then I'll just say this as well, in case we do have some Klein nerds watching. You know, you got the two-layer thing going on, and then you got the first level, second level thing going on as well. You know, which is like, it gets not
layers.
Not even to mention the upper and lower register, which is another thing entirely.
Even the layers have layers.
Yeah, exactly. So and people,
the levels of layers and the layers of levels. Yeah.
But you know, the basic, I mean, the language Klein uses is, even though if you get confused on these points, I mean, basically it is helpful. The idea is what we're looking for here is that, sure, you've got these two layers running alongside each other. There's a substrata, so to speak, you know, as you have works and grace in their antithesis. But, you know, as redemptive history goes, you've got the kingdom prologue, you know, Klein's magnum opus there is Genesis, as it gets ready to foreshadow the kingdom, which is essentially the Old Testament as its first layer, you know, which is flowing out. It's one big typological, sorry, not layer, level. I did it. See, I messed it up. One big, which is the first level. You're going to be
level. 1689 federal visioning before you know it.
I know. So you got the two layers running all the way out. You know, that's true. Individuals saved by grace, and yet typological representatives of something, you know, on a works principle. But what we're talking about here is that the kingdom in its typological form, the first level of that kingdom, has been prologued by Genesis, and then the whole Old Testament is the first level of which is a level of typology, and then the second level is the level of fulfillment. So, you know, which we all know, but it's just a helpful way to put all that together, I think, and just, you know, see how it all adds up. So
yeah. So
we're running out of synonyms for layers.
Dispensationalism.
The level layer.
Yeah,
level layer.
But you know,
it's basically the opposite of seeing this dispensational thing, where basically the Old Testament's the real deal, the New Testament's the caveat.
Well,
I mean, not
you know,
exactly, because
exactly.
See the,
yeah. Well, because you got the Reformed guys.
The church is the caveat, basically.
So we got a bit of a delay, but yeah, absolutely. No, the dispensational angle is huge, because you've got this big squabble obviously going on, and I realize now when we say dispensational, we mean probably classical and, you know, so forth, and we realize there are 100 variants of it since then. But just for the sake of argument, yeah, you know, when it came about, you had this big squabble between the Reformed and dispensational camp, because, you know, it's discontinuity or continuity, you know, and they're just wrestling each other, and, you know, this one wants it all different and two different things. This one wants it all together. And, you know, for Klein to come the way he did, what did I even say there?
The way he did.
the way he did it. You go to dead.
Old K-Dog. The way he did it.
He did.
The way K-Dog came in, the way he did it. So what I was saying was, for Klein to come along the way that he did and put this thing into play that gives it years the dispensational person, that's wrestling with the discontinuity issue. There's really much in Klein that years that, and he was so much so that he was called a crypto dispensationalist, and obviously wrongly so, but this is because he wasn't willing to go all the way to the mono-covenantalist side and just disregard all of that. So there was an integrity about what he was seeing there. He wasn't willing to throw it out. That's why I think it's so amenable. A lot of the times you have progressive dispensationalists that they don't immediately just hate what you're saying when you talk about clients out there. In fact, it's kind of helpful for them a lot of the time. For Baptists too, because we've got a lot of discontinuity. But it's not to say that Klein was any of those things. I mean, he was properly reformed and emphasized continuity the whole way around, but really just immensely helpful on all of those points. The right way to solve all of those tensions. You had Daniel Fuller come along with his gospel contrast or continuum, and just jettisoning the covenant theology altogether and saying there's just basically a law gospel continuum, taking almost a John Piper approach. And that's the wrong way to solve this issue. If you're sick of the dispensational covenantal debate, this is the right way
instead of keeping it separate, distinct, but together.
Yeah, exactly. So really a very rich section. So many things too. It's the nexus of so much that's going on.
And we haven't even scratched the surface of the significance of the Kings. I mean, just I really appreciated his work on the Psalms.
Yes.
He spoke about Psalm 89, Psalm 132, Psalm of Ascents with the Davidic hope, and just where the Davidic hope fits into the exile. There's just so much to expand on there.
The king's relationship to God, he says, as son, along with his responsibilities to keep the covenant, raises the issue of the discipline of the king and what happens to God's promise of a continuing dynasty. If the king breaks the covenant has a conditional aspect that relates to each individual king. There's your thing, Andre. Each king must keep the covenant. If a king does not keep it, then God may use other nations to bring judgment against him and Israel. So that's some of the complexity he brings out there. He says, up to this point, though, Israel was God's firstborn son. Now the king of Israel is the son with God as his father. See, now it's setting it up for Christ. The special relationship of sonship means that the king serves as a covenant mediator. Wow. As son, he shares the throne with God, his father. I mean, this is like, how do you make sense of Hebrews if you don't know this? Is what I'm thinking. As son, he shares,
and the fact.
Sorry, go for it.
And the fact that he talks about the king having some priestly.
Yeah. Oh, there we go.
Roles. And that again, Hebrews is
totally. As son, he shares the throne with God, his father, and has access to the Father. This is the Davidic king. He represents God to the people, but he also represents the people to God. So really,
very rich.
What an important part of Scripture. Maybe just one more little bit here, playing on your comment there with the Psalms. He says the close relationship between Yahweh and the Davidic king that was expressed in Psalm 2, verse 7, is also expressed in David's cry, "You are my father," and in the close relationship between Yahweh and David. Just as Yahweh is head of the heavenly assembly, so he will make David the firstborn, the highest of the kings of the earth. Wow. So profound. So profound.
Amen.
It just, for me, it's just like it brings the whole thing together. It takes it from, why do we have this section on David now? They're like, well, what is this whole deal with David, and why can't we just get to the New Testament already? Well, this is like, you just don't know what's going on in the New Testament. I mean, wow, you think how replete the New Testament is with allusions to this concept. And this is what the new covenant is. It's building the temple. It's the house of David. It's the thing that has been foreshadowed and has now come. Just one more little thing here. He says Psalm 89 and 132 are fulfilled in Christ, who is the descendant of David, the son who will sit on the throne forever. So those are some key points and highlights for me in the essay, which, if I didn't mention it before, again, is in the book Covenant Theology. Biblical, can we remember the order? Biblical, theological, and historical perspectives. That's the book. Expensive little guy. But if you can get it. There is one. Hey, here's another shout out. Isaac Jones. My goodness, have I got your name right. That would be embarrassing. Isaac Jones.
Is he on Facebook?
It's a shout out. Yeah. Well, he is. I mentioned him because he's a good buddy and he's studying Latin. Keep going, Isaac. You can do it. But he is also reading along with us in the book. So that's good to know.
Brilliant.
That people are actually reading along. As I told him, that's good. Good for me to know that it's a little less abstract for people that are listening because, they'll actually read through the essay. So that's good.
I mean, the most important part is what we say, but it's also good if you read the book.
You can listen to Belcher if you want to, a little bit. Yeah. But I think you got the meat of it at the end of the day. I mean, you got the heart of it. Perfect critique.
I don't actually think you even need to read the book.
I don't. You know what? I recant because I'm with you. I actually agree with you 100%. Scrap the book. You got everything you need right here. 2H Sojourner. Yeah. Two. Oh. Wow. That is crazy. We've got. How do you do like an S though?
You have to go like 2H and then.
That is so epic. Bro. I can't believe you just thought about that on the spot. What? 2H Sojourner. Yes. Then we just like spit at each other for a while. It'd be so sick.
You could totally, that could be on our t-shirt.
Right. Oh, dude, 2H Sojourner.
yeah. You could do this wrong though. There's a way of doing this that's not gonna be
loser,
good.
Loser. Double loser.
Whatever. Major loser.
2H Soda. Oh boy. Anyway, okay.
And for those of you who are listening, you should go watch YouTube.
There's no way we can translate that.
Someone was in sign language.
I really was keen to get a little bit of gear together though. Do a t-shirt or two.
Yeah, man.
It's easy enough to do these days. We might as well get that done. I suppose I was just wanting to settle on a logo and stuff, and I suppose we've done that now by default.
I think yeah. You can even get your nice little cloud thing, and just get that on.
The clouds. Yeah.
Clouds.
Yeah.
That's actually you call it clouds. I call it a picture of you and Nick.
The garden cloud.
It's a picture of you and a picture of Nick, and you guys are looking at the S.
What? And the S is you? You're the S?
No, I'm not in there. All right, let's wrap this up. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed 2H Sojourner. There we go. It's gonna take a little practice. Oh, 2H. 2H Sojourner. All right. That's the end of the podcast.
Switch.